Welcome to the Living Life Juicy podcast. We're here to explore how we can be present and kind as we do great things by talking with people who are living life juicy. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so that more people can explore how to live life juicy. Also, be sure to check out our other resources like the Growing People podcast, where we post explainer videos and other material on how people and groups develop. The Into Wisdom group is guiding people in groups to their next best step towards growth and sustainability by designing experiences and resources to develop individual professionals and their organizations. Go to intowisdomgroup.com. And then just now, coming out in April 21st, The Pottery Panda is my new book. It's a business fable about strategic planning, and it follows Peter, a raccoon, who starts his own business. Visit potterypanda.com to find out how to pre-order a copy. So right now, we get to spend some time with Darrell Hammond. And Darrell started a consulting group called Higher Ground. And it's really interesting because he has a great story, a history. I'm going to let him tell you how he got there. But it involves basketball, it involves corporate and HR work, it involves nonprofits, and it involves to where he stands today. And I want to hear from him how he got here. So Darrell, welcome. Thank you for being here.
I appreciate it. Apparently, we got the Blue Crew thing going on here.
Exactly.
With
active wear. Yeah.
There you go.
I got the outdoor fleece, and you've got the gym layout there.
There you go. Yeah, I've been reflecting a lot about my parents here lately. My mom was just inducted last week into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame.
Wow.
And this is a woman who was super introverted. She was the first Black woman to graduate from the University of Colorado Nursing College. And it was just fascinating that she would never, if she were still alive, she would just say, you know what, I don't know what the fuss is. I just did what I had to do because I wanted to be a nurse, and I didn't care what they did to me. I didn't care how much they, didn't allow me to do things that other people did. And I just, when I think about what you're trying to do here, John, in terms of trying to think about kindness, my mom was one of the kindest people that I know. I mean, and at some point we can kick around the idea, is it possible to be too kind? Right? That's a whole nother topic for maybe another day. But as I think about, her being a nurse and my dad being a social worker, what my brother and I didn't realize is that we were being brought up and raised in this environment of watching out and looking out for other people. And it was subliminal. It wasn't anything that was, forced down our throat. It's just we saw them, we heard them, and we followed their lead. We both went into different fields, but we both are really caring about other folks.
What's your brother do?
My brother was a mathematician / hydrologist for the United States Geological Survey. And so he ended up actually serving in a place where whenever there was a natural disaster, his team was called out, and they were trying to do what? Protect the earth, protect the people around, and he was just in this environment, natural guy, great leader, all of that. So, with this family that kind of got into, I got a general business management degree and didn't really know what to do with that. I played basketball in high school and then got a scholarship to play in college. And it was one of those things where I don't really know what I'm going to do. I mean, let's get a generic degree that will apply anywhere. So I kind of got this business management degree. I call it my 3-prong plug. And that plug fits into business or music or arts or whatever, right? You can put it anywhere. And what ended up happening was I ended up joining an oil company and joined their recruiting firm, or a recruiting staff, I should say. John, I had the best first job ever. It was awesome because remember, I was still a basketball player, just got out of college. I was taught how to recruit engineers by day, play basketball on whatever campus I happened to be on that night, eat on the expense account, go to the next college. It was awesome.
Did you use your hoops to recruit for the engineering company? I just don't see the big crossover between engineering majors. The athletes tend not to go there.
Yeah, well, that's true. So by day, I was recruiting those folks that were thinking about engineering, whether it was, oil and gas engineering or whatever. But by night, I was just a hooper, man. I was looking for college guys that were still playing at a high level. And then, of course, after a full day of all of that, I'm starving, so I get something good to eat, and literally going to all the major engineering firms around, or engineering universities around the country. Yeah, so I was on Purdue and MIT and all these different places. It was great. It was awesome.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's interesting. Like, so you went into business, but you still had the basketball heart.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how. Now, did you grow up playing organized sports?
I did not. My parents were not athletic at all. Fortunately for me, a neighbor moved in next door who was super athletic, played all different kinds of sports. So whenever we weren't at home, we were out in the front yard or in the backyard or on some field or basketball court doing something, and he would just whoop our butts. I mean, he was such a good athlete that we had to really try hard to keep up with him. And what you don't realize when that's happening is that you're actually getting better, even though you're still getting the daylights beat out of you. you're developing skills even in the process of losing a lot.
How did that impact when you started to play organized ball?
Well, people started to say things like, I think I actually started playing basketball in the 9th grade. And I remember, I was just growing so fast, John. I mean, I was growing out of my clothes. Like in 2 or 3 months, I'd grow out of my clothes and just growing, had a big spurt. And I just remember I played in like my first or second basketball game, and somebody came up to me and said, "Who taught you how to do that?" And I was like, "Taught me how to do what?" And he's like, "Run backwards down the court so you could see what was going on the court." And I was like, "I don't know. I mean, I don't think anybody taught me. It just seemed like a good thing to do."
Yeah, for me, it would have been my brother would have hit me in the back of the head with the ball.
Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't something that I didn't even think I'd be very good at it. But as I started to grow, I started to realize, okay, I think I could get good at this. And I remember one summer, John, I thought, okay, if I'm growing this fast and I want to get good, I gotta really work on this. And so I got some of my dad's old work gloves, right? I mean, those old leather, like railroad gloves, real thick ones. And I got a ball and I went over and I found a hoop because we didn't have one in our house. It was on somebody's driveway. And I just started dribbling with these thick gloves on and shooting with these gloves on like all summer long. And I mean, just sweating up a storm because, those things are so thick. What ended up happening is, guess what? You take those gloves off and your touch is so much sharper. And your dribbling and your handling is so much better. So that actually kind of gave me my skills caught up with my growth spurt, at that point.
Yeah.
And then played in high school and got a scholarship to college and played at a very competitive level. And interestingly enough, so during that season when I was with the oil company and I was playing as I was traveling around the country recruiting. Someone in my city said, "Hey, you know what? You should try out for this exhibition basketball team that travels around the world." And I was like, those guys are last cuts from the pros. I never made the pros. I really didn't think I would do that. And so, John, and when I was in college, for some reason, I had this crazy dream that I'd love to play in the Olympics. Now, that's a dream that a lot of people have, and a whole lot of people never achieve, right?
Right.
But it was just one of those things like, man, that would be so cool to represent, our country in this space. So anyway, I go off and I'm playing AAU ball and I'm doing my thing in the oil and gas industry. And I guess I go try out for this team. And this team is an exhibition team. And not only do we travel and play, but we also do public speaking. Well, guess what? I was pretty good at running my mouth, John. I might have been better running my mouth. I might have been better running my mouth than I was dribbling a ball or shooting a ball. And so because I think I had a little bit of both, I had a pretty good chemistry of both, I made this team. And for 2 years, we traveled around the world playing colleges and prisons and military bases all over the world. And then my claim to fame here is in 1984, man, we're going back a long way here. The communist countries boycotted and did not go to the LA games. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so our team was already in stage to go and be Team USA in Melbourne, Australia for the 100th anniversary of the Australia Games. And all the teams that didn't show up in Los Angeles showed up in Melbourne. And so we were literally playing in an Olympic. I have goosebumps telling the story right now. And we walked out of there with the silver medal. We were hanging out in the Olympic Village, eating with other teams from other countries. It was awesome. It was absolutely amazing.
Now, well, tell me a little bit more about this team that they would work with. They would play games and then speak. What the organization with it?
Yeah, well, it was a faith-based organization, so it was an opportunity to travel and share our faith as we played. So imagine a really super high caliber team that would show up and be like an exhibition team for some major university.
Was this athletes in action, or is this a different one?
Very similar to Athletes in Action. Okay. Yeah.
What was it? I want to make sure I get it right.
Well, Athletes in Action actually split off. They had two teams, and one of the teams split off and became the Spirit Express. And so we were the Spirit Express. And so, yeah, it was based, same premise, all of that is Athletes in Action. And the cool thing, John, is that, as you're out here playing, you go to a city and you want to try to reach as many people as you can. So there's usually a military base, there's usually a prison, there's usually a college, and probably we're going to do some high school stuff during the day as well. So it was a pretty full and active schedule. We didn't have a home court, so we had about 120 game season, which was a lot of playing, not at home, so a lot of traveling. And but man, it was that. As a matter of fact, if we're going to connect stories here, I remember playing in a maximum security prison in Parchman, Mississippi. It was a 5,000 person maximum security, 5,000 people incarcerated. And I just remember at halftime, because you have a captive audience. I mean, nobody, you don't have a lot to do. So literally, we're gonna go play your best team, and you're gonna show up and get some laughs and have a good time. And I remember standing at half court, looking into the stands of all of these guys in orange jumpsuits, and the knowledge of the numbers in my head and the reality of what I was seeing just really punched me in the gut. And that is, there are an inordinate amount of people of color in prison. And when you look into the stands, and everyone in the stands, or a good portion of the stands, are people of color, I was just like, man, something's really broken here. And I don't know, I can't do anything about it, but man, what is going on here? And I just remember walking out of that prison in Mississippi and going, I have to be a part of this solution. I had no idea what that meant.
Yeah. So were you playing while you're still working for the corporate?
Nope. I actually quit my oil job and went and played for 2 years full time, and literally just traveled around the world. And started our family during that time. I mean, a whole bunch of things were going on all at once.
Well, and if you want to talk about living life juicy, started a family, quit to go to a traveling nonprofit thing. That's being present and kind as you do great things.
Well, I hope so. I know that, what was fascinating, John, is as we would go into these prisons, we would walk around. I mean, we had on our gear ready to play, but we'd walk around and we'd talk to the guys in prison. And no matter where we were, East Coast, West Coast, didn't matter. You'd ask somebody the question, hey, how long you been in? What are you in for? Have you, what are your plans when you're going to get out, right? Or hopefully you're going to be thinking about something different. And 9 times out of 10, the guys would say, actually, me and the boys have been talking. I figured out how to get over on the system the next time. And I'm like, dude, how many times have you been in? 5. And I'm like, you suck at this. Why would you think that, you could go out and do this again and do it better next time? It's just not. And I didn't even realize that comment is recidivism, right? I'm actually planning to go out and do more of what I did before and come right back and do it again.
Well, and I want to get to, because I know you're doing stuff right now, probably as a direct result of you standing on mid-court. But where did this plan for this amateur team that ends up getting silver in the Australia Games, after the 2 years of traveling, what did you do?
So after 2 years of traveling, I actually went back into a corporate space and was working for a high-tech company. And because I had recruiting experience before that, guess what I did? I went back in and recruited for this company that was growing super fast. And literally we were doubling about every 6 months in size because of acquisition, but also because of a lot of recruiting. And that helped me realize that I was meeting a lot of people that were joining the organization. And it actually turned the corner and turned into a promotion into an organization called organizational development, which is supporting, internal clients, if you will, to help them to do better, be better, team better,
Right.
collaborate better, all of that. And when I bumped into that, I was like, man, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Whether it's inside or outside, I want to do that. And so basically, it was probably about at that same time that I actually started a nonprofit basketball camp for kids of incarcerated adults. So these were kids that if they don't get this, if they're following after mom and dad, guess where they're going? And it was just like, maybe I can impact them, because guess what? They all want to play basketball better. And I'm really tall. So they're going to listen. If I told them you put 2 frogs in your pocket, you'll jump higher, they would go out and do it. So what if I could use that influence to actually say, let me show you how to make good decisions on the court and off the court. Let me show you how to have good character. Let me show you how to make good decisions that will benefit you and not actually hold you back. So I did that for probably 5 years while I was working my way up the corporate ladder. And John, every time I got to the top of the organization as the chief HR person, I farmed out all of the comp, the benefits, the recruiting to other people who were very capable.
Mm-hmm.
And I held on to the OD piece and started to work with the CEO and the executive team, because if they don't get it right, the organization is going to have a really hard time struggling getting it right.
And
And
honestly, as I work with HR leadership, that's not the typical person who gets promoted to that post.
right,
I mean, as I experience working with that group, it's usually the people who get the admin part down and just want to they get that locked in, and the organizational and people development part falls by the wayside. Even the companies that have the chief people officer, all that kind of stuff, they're really more worried about compensation and making sure that all the ducks in a row for compliance and all that.
right.
How did it for that organization, how willing were the other senior executives to work with you on the HR stuff or on the OD stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first, let me just say I was so honored to be able to have some really high caliber directors that were reporting to me, who cared about all of those things as much as I did, maybe more so, so that I knew that those pieces were
Mhm.
covered, right? In terms of making sure that people were being paid equitably and that we were doing, treating people fairly and all of that. But when, and I'd say it's probably 50-50 to really answer your question. Some of those executives wanted me to just, shut up, smile and file, right? The smile and file department is kind of what they expected. And I was like, that's not who I am. That's not what you're going to get from me. What we're going to do is we're actually going to model the values of the organization. We're actually going to show people what it looks like to be committed, engaged, collaborative, and all of that. Because if we do it here, then the rest of the organization will follow suit. And we can't tell them we're going to do one thing and not do another at the top. And again, you get a 50-50 mix. Some people are just like, this is my fiefdom. I run this, stay out of my business. I'm not doing any of that crap and whatever. You got a little of both, right? You got some people that leaned in.
Yeah.
The best CEOs that I worked for made sure that everyone was leaning in, or they would help them find their way off to another job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's so helpful. The best head of organization, whatever it is that I've worked with, the best ones are curious, and usually those are the ones who ask for the OD help.
Right.
And probably they get it so much that they don't really need the help, but they know that they can do it better. And the ones that I was assigned to, hey John, you need to work with this person.
Right.
And those are the people going, no, I don't need you. The
Right.
ones that are saying, go pound sand, I'm going to run my world. Those are the
Right.
ones who need it the most.
Right. That is so true. Yeah, I had one CEO that when he was recruiting me, when he realized how much I cared about OD and the structure and the culture and what it feels like to be a part of the organization, he said, I'm not going to make you the HR VP. I'm going to make you the OD VP, and then we're going to actually tack on HR onto that. I want people to know that you are here mainly for organizational development. And oh, by the way, we do HR too. And I was like, wow, you don't hear that very often.
That's awesome, because like I worked in a corporate that had VP representation for training, totally separate from HR.
Wow.
And so that was wonderful, because that spoke volumes to the crowd about how important training, learning, development, especially my part of it, which was leadership development. And then they tacked on, like I took on the OD's part for the learning organization. So OD was all considered part of that whole area that had a VP sitting at the table.
Right.
And that felt really good. I mean, for you to be there and the organization to say, you know what, HR is a function of organizational development, not the other way around.
Right.
That's just an awesome statement.
Yeah. It was one of the things that I haven't shared with you, which is super important to me, is along the way, starting when I was traveling around the world, we had kids about every 2 years for 5 years. And so we've got 5 kids. They're all adults now, out doing their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was a VP of one of these organizations, and I was beating the drum of organizational development and doing things right, there was an individual who didn't really care about OD and didn't care about anyone but himself. And he started doing things that were ethical, and I mean all the things that you're going to get you in trouble and put you on the front page and cause people to sue you and all that stuff. And as I brought these things up, it was just like, no, I'm going to do whatever the heck I want to do. And I was like, tell me what you're trying to accomplish. I think we can still get there, but we're not going to do wrong on the way to getting that done. That's not who we are. And I just kept getting this pushback. So this guy ended up being he was a CFO who ended up being an interim CEO. So now he's in the big chair, and it was a season, John, where it was almost like, so we had this huge parent company above us, and I went through a season where it was, I've got to report this guy. I've got to be a whistleblower, and I am a sole income guy over 7 mouths that I'm feeding, myself included. And am I ever going to get another job if I blow the whistle? Or am I going to do the right thing? And there was this challenge, character-wise, like, wait a minute, you talk about doing the right thing and making the right choices and being honorable and being respectful. And it was one of those things that it was scary, but it was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, basically kind of shared with my corporate, compliance officer what was going on. And I just felt like this is not who we say we are. Well, you asking me as the corporate compliance officer for everyone under my division to take care of this. And then you are now I'm being led by someone who doesn't care about that. I can't work in that environment. I mean, if you could choose to keep him, but if you do that, I'm out. I'm not trying to pressure you. I'm not trying to do anything, but this is not who I am and who I want to be. And that was one of the biggest growth moments. Talk about juicy. I remember thinking, okay, I need to learn how to speak CFO, right? I can't influence this guy. So what does he care about? Numbers, all right? So I went in and I found some other CFOs and I was like, teach me CFO, right? Teach me how to speak, in a way that will be compelling enough that we can still get the results, but in a way that is honorable and respectful. None of that worked. None of it worked. And so it was one of those things where I was ready to walk away, and the mothership came in and said, well, he's, what we find, what bottom line here is he had a platinum parachute, not a gold parachute, platinum parachute. So guess what? They were not going to let him go because they didn't want to pay that platinum parachute. So here was the answer they gave me. He's really not being discriminatory well, he's actually consistent. He treats everyone the same. And I'm like, exactly, which is why he shouldn't be here. And if you're telling me if that's the reason why you're going to keep somebody like this, I'm tapping out. Yeah. I want nothing to do with it.
And did they realize that like that platinum parachute could be the better deal? Because if they get slammed, he goes up on the front page, man, that's expensive.
That's not where their head was at that time, John. So they decided to not exercise the platinum parachute and to keep this high risk, high disrespectful person in place, allow people to continue to be disrespected and mistreated and all of that. And I was just like, that's not who I am, and I can't buy into that. So
Yeah.
it was a very trying season. But you know what? I actually grew a backbone during that season.
Yeah.
Right? I grew a backbone because it was like, where is your limit? You know, are you just going to be the guy that just kind of goes along with stuff, or are you really going to sit up straight and go, no, this is not who we say we are, and if we're really going to follow through with it, then we've got to behave differently and we got to think differently.
Yeah,
So
that's my brother was a VP in an insurance company, and he had all the big cases. So he had to go back and explain how a $10 million ruling was actually a favorable ruling, because of there's such big cases, and
right,
that's sometimes the C-suite doesn't get that. Let's look at what could happen. This could, instead of 10 million, this could have been like 60 million.
right.
So, it's how do you explain those things to where they have this narrow focus? And, so the where Living Life Juicy comes from, Living Juicy is my really bad interpretation of John 10:10, where Jesus says, I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly. And as for me, it's like, I've come that you might have life and live it juicy. And what juicy means is live abundant and a little bit messy. Because, man, when you're doing what you're doing, life gets messy, and that's good. That's what it means to be living overflowing and being present and kind. And I think a lot of people miss that opportunity that you took to grow the backbone, to realize that, man, my self and my integrity and my presence is much more important than just keeping a position.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, that's a great example of just the definition, man. You ought to go with that. The juicy, that is a really great definition of how you get your head around that, for sure.
Yeah. So tell me, there's a couple of things in my head where I could go this direction. Tell me how being an executive informed leading a nonprofit, and how leading a nonprofit informed you being an executive.
Yeah, that is a great question. So in my corporate travels, I was traveling around the country. I think it was with a pharmaceutical company as their VP, checking in on different regions and that kind of thing. And there was actually a ministry down in Dallas, Texas, that I really cared about. They were doing stuff in the inner city. And I remember calling them up and just saying, hey, here's who I am. Here's my toolbox. Here's what I do. I would love to give you an in-kind gift of just a personal day. Like the next time I'm through Dallas, I'll just take a personal day, and then you tell me what you want and I'll deliver it to you. And it was just like a gift to them because they were doing good things. And what I didn't realize at the time, John, is that I was actually cutting my teeth in consulting, because you have to find out what are their needs, what are their challenges, what have you already done, what's worked and what hasn't worked. And, you're having this whole kind of holistic mindset. I didn't even think of it as consulting at the time, but as I did that for a number of years, in between VP jobs, I would turn the key from nonprofit to for-profit, make some money at it, get the next VP job, turn it back off, start giving it away again. And I loved the work because I loved who I was working with and the missions of these nonprofits, right? So I think that's where I kind of fell in love with serving people who are serving other people. Like if you were to give me a tagline in terms of what I do, that's it. I want to serve leaders and organizations who are serving others. And if I can equip them and help them and encourage them and send them back in the game with some tools to actually do better and be better, that's why my purpose on the planet. So I think that informed my nonprofit space. But then when you flip back around, sometimes in the corporate space, you're only thinking about numbers and dashboards and dollars and statistics. And I think it informed me back on the corporate side to be able to say, our mission, we have lost sight of the reason why we exist. Let's go all the way back to the beginning to mission, vision, and values. If we can connect people's heartstrings and their headstrings to the mission, then we're not only doing a good thing out in the community, but we're also bringing people along who love this kind of work and who love working with us because of what we're doing, not just so that we can ring the bell and make lots of money. And so I feel like that informed my corporate side. Is that the question that you were asking there?
No, yeah, I wanted there's no right answer, but I like the fact, number one, I think serving people who serve people might inform your nonprofit, but that's exactly what you're doing when you're at your best in the corporate world, whether it's consulting or as a VP. There's servant leadership, but it sounds like when you say that you're serving people who serve people, this is the support that servant leaders need. And they may not put it in their head, but I think, I don't know, do you see the best executives, the people up in the C-suite, have that mentality? The best ones, not all of them, have the mentality of, I'm here, it's an upside down inverted pyramid where the shoulders of all the people that work for me are on my shoulders.
Right.
I'm here to empower them.
Absolutely. Remember the classic book, and if for those of you who haven't read this, I'm gonna give you a blessing right now. Jim Collins wrote a book called Good to Great years ago, which is a classic book. You got to read it. And one of the things he said when he was trying to find out, he took companies that were all in the same kind of field, in the same season of life, if you will, and he tried to find out, why did some companies just stay normal and others really took off, right? I mean, they went up and to the right and things were great. And so he went at it analytically speaking, not knowing what he would find out. But what he ended up finding out is that it was leadership that actually took them from good to great. And he came up with this definition called a level 5 leader. Remember this? Where he started to talk about the best leaders look out the window, which means they're going to give away the fact that the reason that we made and we're doing so well is because of all these people that made it possible. And when things are not going well, they look in the mirror and they say, oh, what did I do to actually get us here? And he came up and he found that there was a lot of data that the organizations that went from good to great had level 5 leaders who were willing to take responsibility and also give away these accolades and not just keep them for themselves. And last thing was that they were so concerned about the mission and vision that they cared more about that the organization did well, that if they left, that they still wanted it to go well, that everything didn't center around them. And when they leave, then the whole thing crashes and burns, that they wanted to create something that was long lasting and sustainable.
Yeah, so, as he was writing that book, he did it with a bunch of grad students up at Stanford, and they identified, I can't remember exactly, they identified like 4 or 5 factors that took organizations good to great, and he pushed for not putting leader in there. Everybody says leaders, everybody's leader, and his grad students said, it's not complete. Look, you got to look at this. So it was like against his will that he included the level 5 leader in that.
That's right. That's exactly right. Good memory. And I just love that book so much, because a good leader will get the right people on the bus, get them in the right seats on the bus, and get the wrong people off the bus. And I don't mean like by taking them out back and shooting them. I mean, he's going to help them realize you have a different focus and a different passion that doesn't fit here. And it's okay. I'm going to help you find the next thing, because we got to get somebody in this seat who is as passionate about what we're doing as the rest of us.
Well, and I've had both, coaching and consulting gigs where I'm talking with a leader who doesn't want to fire somebody, and they're very compassionate and they're very like, man, family and all that. And so you sit down and you say, are you happy with their performance? No, I'm not. This is killing us. Do you think they're happy here? No, they're not. They've told me.
Right.
So why are you prolonging this? And I jokingly say, it's time for you to bless another organization with your talents, jokingly. But in the best case scenario, that person who you help find the better fit becomes a great recruiter for your organization.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. If you think of the DISC profile, right? There are lots of different ways to lead. You can be an effective leader anywhere on that DISC profile or Enneagram, or just pick one, doesn't matter. But when I think about DISC in particular, sometimes when you're in one of the lower quadrants, which is S or C, you really don't want to bring a lot of conflict is not your favorite thing. And having that conversation feels so, I don't want to be that person that lets somebody go, right? When in fact, if we let someone who is not doing a good job stay in their role, we are actually part of the problem as a leader, right? And so that's been my philosophy is, if you stop whining about this person if you're not going to do something about it, right?
Well,
Because
and you just, the definition of S is that person who is people focused and, and thoughtful. And if you could, I framed it with somebody who, one of the few people who made it up to senior leadership as an S in this one organization. And when I framed it as, if you really want to be empathetic for this person, if you really want to care about them, put yourself in their shoes. Do you think they're having a good time?
right,
And
absolutely.
all of a sudden this S person is going, man, I can really care about this person by getting them to find something new and different where they're going to be happy.
Right. This makes me think, so I'm just going to refer to some of my favorite authors and people who speak out in leadership. Brene Brown has an amazing saying that kind is clear and unkind is unclear, right? If I'm not clear with you about how you're not meeting expectations, then I'm not really being kind. I'm just avoiding it because it's more comfortable for me, not that it's best for our organization. And I just think that's so profound.
Yeah.
There are ways to still be kind and be clear where a person realizes, I need to get off the bus. This is not the best fit for me. And it's okay. It's an okay thing. Like you said, they can go and be a blessing somewhere else.
Yeah. So that reminds me of another book called Blah, Blah, Blah by a guy named Rohn. And basically he says, in communication, you have blah, which is just boring. You have blah, blah, which is inaccurate. And then you have blah, 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 which obfuscates. And he's got this whole thing. It's about visual and verbal thinking and putting it out there, but being able to recognize not only in others, but in yourself when you're doing blah, 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 which is not that unclear piece. And really, it's not intended to do anything other than obfuscate what's really going on and hide the reality for whatever reason. And that's never good.
Yeah.
And so learning how to communicate that isn't boring, that isn't inaccurate, and also that doesn't confuse the matter.
Right. Yeah. So John, you've been firing questions at me. Let me fire a question at you. So is it possible to be too kind? Is there a pendulum where you swing too far in one direction and is there such a thing as being too kind?
Okay, you hit something that I'm doing a lot of work right now. I'm reading a book called Think Again by Adam Grant, which is really good on one side of things, but my business is called Into Wisdom. And so wisdom and studying what wisdom is kind of a big thing for me. And this year, that's one of my big things is I'm rethinking about wisdom, but around a lot of other stuff as well. So is there such a thing as being too kind? There's two bumpers that I use in my thinking. One is evidence-based thinking. That's what I'm getting a lot from Adam Grant. The other is what I would call wisdom. And the way where I'm at right now, and I reserve the right to change this at any point.
Right.
So wisdom is your picture of what the good life is. It's the definition of how you think it's best to live in the world. And then evidence-based, you need to combine this because evidence, especially in stuff that we do, it's not clear cut. I mean, there's a lot of muddy waters when it comes to what the evidence points to. So in order to, that's one bumper. The other bumper is how you define what the best life is. And I got that after conversation about what is God's wisdom or biblical wisdom, because they reference that in the world's wisdom, and the God's wisdom is foolishness to the world. So it all depends on, there's lots of evidence that says no such thing as too kind, and you're a sucker if you're too kind. Now it's a matter of choosing which the other bumper is going to be. Because I think if you're looking at many people, especially in the corporate world, but even in the streets, don't be nice because you're going to get taken advantage of. There's such things of, but if you're looking at, for me, you look at the evidence of, man, kindness paves the road. I can't remember the book right now, but They studied how people got to power and how they kept power. You get to power by being altruistic, caring for others, have the needs of other people in mind. That gets you into power. And then when you forget that is when you lose power.
Yeah.
And so for me, you got to look at both those sides and say, like, I'm trying to figure out what it means to follow the wisdom literature of what the Bible says, of Judeo-Christian perspectives, and what that says. And the guy who's the main spokesperson, Jesus, said, was asked, how often do you forgive? 7 times? 70 times 7, which is like saying forever.
Yeah.
And then in the Beatitudes, it says, somebody sues you, give them your coat too.
Yeah.
Soldiers come and, take your stuff, give them whatever's extra. And that's living juicy. That kind of perspective, which is, my kindness doesn't depend on your response to it. It's not it's not transactional. And
good.
Man, that's tough. That's really hard. Does that, what do you think of that? What's your?
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate that. And, one thing that we haven't talked about today is there was a season, and I want to say it was that season when I left that company because they weren't gonna, they didn't line up with what I felt like was right and reasonable and honorable and all the rest of that. And so I left and I took my severance, and I'm a faith guy, so I took and I did my tithe off of my severance and all of that stuff. But I was unemployed for a number of months, and I remember going to my church and I was like, hey, it just feels weird to not tithe, so I'd like to tithe my time. And the only thing I have to give you, you don't want me to go build anything. I could probably clean stuff, but you probably don't want me building anything or doing anything like that. But here's my little OD toolbox. Can you use any of this stuff? And I think my assignment at that time, and this was a mega church here in Colorado, I think they didn't really have job description. So, I mean, that's something that I could do, but remember, that was not one of my favorite things to do, right?
Right.
So I was like, okay, I offered it, you accepted it, I will go and get on that right away, right? And so what I ended up realizing is that I started to meet some amazing people who were really dedicated to their work, right? They hadn't really thought about things from an organizational perspective. They're working at a church because they are ministers, right? They are people who want to help other people, and they're not necessarily thinking systemically or process oriented. They're just kind of plowing through. So I came back around. I went through. So this church was big enough that it not only had a bunch of staff, but it also had a school attached to it. So we're talking upward of 50 some people that are on staff. So when I came back around, what I would normally do in a consulting assignment is you go back to the person who brought you on board, and you're like, here's what you asked for. And are you interested in hearing some of my observations of what I saw and heard when I was out? And so the senior pastor was kind of like, well, yeah, of course. And I was like, okay, well, here's what I learned. Yeah, you have really dedicated people who don't know how to lead or manage volunteers very well, right? And in a church this size, you've got to have volunteers, otherwise nothing gets done. I mean, you can't have that many staff, so managing volunteers is really key. And I'm really concerned that some of these folks are going to burn out, or their families are going to blow up, because if the volunteers don't come and you have a big event, guess who does it? My wife and my kids and my sisters and brothers, right? I mean, it ends up being this thing which ends up wearing people out. So anyway, I did my thing, walked away, got a call the next morning and said, hey, listen, can you come back up to the church? Want to talk to you. And they offered me a job, and they said, we would like to offer you a job. We can't pay you what you were making in the corporate world. You can still keep doing your nonprofit basketball camp. You can still keep doing your consulting, but we'd like to bring you on as our first ever involvement director, working with volunteers, and our HR director. And like they said, they gave me all the flexibility, the benefits, all that stuff. And so I was like, yeah, sure, let's give that a shot. I can keep consulting. Yeah. Keep doing the basketball camp. Yeah. I was like, yeah, let's do this. Right. And, the long story short on this, John, is that when I think about kindness, going back to our original premise, there are people in ministry who are very, very kind-hearted, right? They got into this because they care about people in a big way. What I found, though, is that we didn't do a good job as staff members of a church, calling people out on their non-performance, right? And so guess who got to do that job, right?
Well, and also, I think that there is such a, if you're not tending to yourself, it's not about being too kind, it's about being too available. And like, there's this, the personal well-being part. And there's what I've seen, and this may be taking you off track of your story, but oftentimes the performance problems are people they feel taken advantage of, and they're underperforming because they just don't care anymore. And that's, I see that as a very difficult things to do, to call people out on their self-care.
Yeah.
And saying, all right, you're underperforming, and yeah, you're a compassionate person at this church. And, as long as they're still doing stuff, I hate to say this because I've been on the other side of it, of being a nonprofit who uses up their volunteers to the point where they have to recover.
Right.
And if a volunteer needs to recover from their ministry or their service, you're doing it wrong.
Right. It's so true. That is so true. What you said is true, but it's one factor. There are lots of other factors. I mean, there are people who lose their passion, and then they don't even know that they're actually stealing, right? Because they're getting their full paycheck, but they're not doing their full job, right? And this was like, I got my master's degree in dealing with people being in this job, right? So one of the things that I haven't shared with you yet is, a year into this job, they came back to me and they said, listen, we see what you can do. We'd like to offer you a position as an executive pastor. So that's kind of like the chief operating officer of a company, right? And so it's operations, it's HR, it's a lot of other things, building and grounds, campuses, all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I found is that as I was having these conversations of people who just didn't have the juice, right? Let's go there. They didn't have the juice that they used to have. I would have these conversations that would just be able to say, I've seen you perform at a 5. On a scale of 1 to 5, I've seen you perform at a 5, but lately you've been like at a 1.5 or a 2. I don't understand it, but your compensation and your expectations are built here, not here. And so the question that I need to ask you is, it's not optional to do 1 and 2 work. So the question is, do you have it in you to do 5 work, or is this a season that's over and you need to reconsider if this is the right time for you to be here or not? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you the next couple of days off to think about this, to pray about this, to do whatever you need to do about it. And when we come back together in a couple of days, we're going to determine if you're ready to jump back to a 5 and be there and we never speak of this again, or whether you're going to have me go down another path, which neither one of us want to go down. So up to you. Go do your thing. Look forward to seeing you in 2 days.
Yeah. Churches don't have those conversations as much as they should.
Right. And you get this mix of people that are just like, you're absolutely right. I can do better. I will do better. And they jump back up and we never speak of it. Other people would come back and go, I have overstayed my season here, and I need to apologize because the last whatever period of time I have only been doing half of my work and getting paid for a full job. So, and I'm like, this doesn't mean you have to leave the church, right? You can this is still your family, it's still your home. We're just changing your occupation. That's all. Mm-hmm. And so it was fascinating that, sometimes being clear. I think this is going back to Brene Brown. Being clear is being kind. They kind of knew that they weren't happy and they weren't enjoying it, and they were kind of stealing at the same time.
Yeah.
And so they were kind of glad to not be in that space anymore, but nobody would call them out on it.
Yeah. And I don't know of anybody that I've heard of where they may appear surprised, but almost everybody knows something is going on. They may not know what, but they know that there's something that isn't right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we get to something that I know that is current in your world, which is the equity, diversity, and inclusion stuff that you're doing, both for Higher Ground, but also for the state, right?
Right. Yeah.
Tell me about what's going on there. I like how you switched the letters around to make it easy to say Jedi.
Yeah.
The journey of equity, diversity, inclusion.
Right. Yeah. What I realized, I was just thinking about this, So during COVID, I ended up getting COVID and getting kind of, separated from my family, because that's what you did back at the beginning of COVID. You didn't go to the doctor. You just stayed away from everybody until you got better. Remember those days?
Oh yeah.
And so in those moments when I was here in my office, and I was literally thinking, is this the end of higher ground consulting? Does COVID choke out higher ground consulting? And this is where it dies, in my basement. I started thinking, there's got to be some way for me to still be good and do good from right here. What can I do? And so during COVID, you might remember, and this is really fresh for some of us, not only were we dealing with lots of people who were ill and dying all over the world, but we were dealing with the fact that everybody was sequestered at home. And you know what we were doing? We were on our devices and we were staying up on the news more than ever, John. So when we saw that people were being murdered, people finally were sitting at home looking at it going, that's not right. that doesn't seem right, that you choke a guy out on the ground, or that you shoot somebody for no reason. And so it felt like, to me, people started to wake up to this idea that maybe there is inequity in the world. There's really inequity right here in my city, and maybe I even have some in me too. And it felt like that door opened up, and I called a woman who had been in equity, diversity, and inclusion work for 30 years, John, 30 years. And I said, you don't know me. Here's who I am. Here's what I do. And I just said, basically, all I've been doing for the last 30 years is I get people to realize that other people see the world differently than they do, that we all come to this with a similar passion. And she said, Darrell, you've been doing that for how long? I said, 20 or 30 years. She said, you've been in inclusion work for 30 years. You just didn't call it that. And she literally put the wind in my sails to actually say, okay, now I have a voice in this space. I'm just going to change the name, because I've been doing the same work, but now this is my opportunity now to actually speak into the lives of leaders who, remember, were pretty freaked out. Like, people were coming to them like, what do we do? How do we say? How do we not offend people? And leaders, because some leaders felt like you're supposed to have all the answers when people come to you, were freaking out. And so I ended up being a confidant and a coach to the leaders that I was already working with. Like, remember your vision, your mission, vision, and values? Just live those, right? Yeah. If you just do, because everybody's values are pretty much the same, right? Treat people with respect, honor the customer, blah, blah, blah. All of those things are pretty close wherever you go. Just live them. Just let it come out in you when you're thinking about talking with people and dealing with customers and all of that. And so what I realized right off the bat is everybody's at a different place on this journey. Some people are further ahead and they're wondering, why in the world aren't we doing more? And there are other people down here on the other end of the continuum that are just like, can we please stop talking about this? This is really uncomfortable. And so I just feel like, because it's almost like I was wired for this moment in time to have a voice in this space, John. And so because everybody's on a journey, I threw a J in front of it and called it Jedi. And people get that. We're all in a different place, and it's okay. I'm not at the same place you are, John, but as long as I'm trying, and I'm trying to learn, and I'm trying to grow and lean, and that philosophy has been very open and endearing to leaders and cultures and organizations. And now I'm almost 6'8". I'm up to my eyeballs in EDI work, just trying to help organizations shift and change the way that they speak and think and act. And I go at the pace that they can go at. There's no prescribed, like, everybody has to be here on April 1st. That's not possible. Yeah. There are too many different type of humans on the planet. But if everybody's leaning in that direction, guess what? When people in the organization who don't believe in your values realize that you're serious about them, they will self-select out. They will go find a place where they can act and behave the way that they want to behave. And guess what? That's a good thing for them and for us, right? Going back to our earlier conversation. And it helps the organization actually meet its goals. So I enjoy the work, John, but it's exhausting too.
Yeah.
Because
I was just going to say, so when I worked at the big corp, they did a riff, and I a lot of stuff into that. I probably should have left about a year beforehand, but I was one of the people that got riffed, and my department, my work group, which had it had it had it had 4 men and 3, and then 4, and then 3 women. After the riff, it was restructured into 6 women and 1 guy. And it was very clear the mission in our organization was to pay attention to diversity and equity. And I get that. And I'm total proponent for that. And I looked at it and said, okay, I'm the right person to let go in this situation for other reasons. But I compared it to I got to spend some time in Africa. And if you talk with Africans, even if you talk to the different areas in Africa that have elephant populations, for the sake of the population, they have to cull the herd so it doesn't destroy the environment in which they're in. It just sucks for the elephants being culled. And my word about this stuff is that, remember, we're trying to get more diverse people sitting at the table. And if you can't make the table bigger, then you've got the issue of having compassion for the people whose seats you're taking away.
Right.
And that's that was a challenging time for me. It's always more complicated than what's out there. But how do you help people? And I hear the compassion in your voice. How do you help organizations understand the impact, not only on bringing the diverse, having diverse perspectives and making sure that you're including the voices and that the process is equitable? How do you help them understand exiting, the people who are exited through this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because of the season that we're in today, in March of 2023, for anybody who's watching, right? We'll just give some perspective here.
Context.
Right? Being rift means there's a reduction in force. So for those of you who've never heard that word before, that's what that is. There's not a lot of riffing going on in the industries that I'm working in right now. There's a whole bunch of riffing going on in high tech and in those places right now. It's not around diversity, though. It's around other reasons. Hopefully they're taking that into consideration, but I'm not in that space per se. The space that I'm in, there are more openings than there are people to put in the openings.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a different kind of challenge. Now, what's fascinating is so this is not officially a part of Higher Ground, but I have another gig that I do where we actually do executive recruiting for faith-based nonprofits. And so it is not uncommon for us to be approached by a church or by a nonprofit that comes in and says, and by the way, not only do I want an executive director, but I want a diversity candidate. That's the new language, right?
Okay.
A diversity candidate. And so what we tell them is, oh, that's great, but what our job is to find you the most qualified person, and we hope that there are diversity candidates in there, however, if we had a great diversity candidate, is your culture ready to receive them? And what can you be doing in the meantime, even if we don't come up with one, to make sure that you're ready to receive diversity candidates of any size, shape, or kind to come into your organization? And it's almost like a light bulb goes on. It's like, oh, yeah.
That's why we're not attracting it.
Right.
Yeah. Here's an interesting, my turn to share a book with, you ever hear of Todd Bolsinger's book, A Tempered Resilience?
No, I haven't. Written that down.
It's an amazing book that looks at what you're talking about with leadership. Leaders are often brought in to bring about change. And he defines leadership as managing change. If you're a leader at all, change has to be a part of it. Otherwise, you're maintaining. You're not even managing.
That's right.
And he talks about the big thing that he gets, because he's a VP at Fuller Seminary for leadership formation and spiritual formation. And when he wrote the book, he was at a crossroads of whether he was going to go into corporate consulting or go back into higher education. He chose higher education. But in the book, he talks about the idea of resilience, and the major factor that most people in for him, it was pastors and faith-based organizations, but also across the board, is that they're brought in to facilitate change. And the people who brought them in said that they wanted the change are usually the saboteurs to that change.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so the idea of one of the biggest skills coming in to an organization that's seeking change is resilience. Knowing that you're going to get the biggest battles from the people who say they want to change.
Yeah, sure.
And it sounds like, you get that right. The best candidate, like you're saying, we're going to give you the best candidate possible, but there's a reason that these candidates aren't being drawn to your organization.
That's right. That's right. And all I have to do is go to your website, and I can tell you, if your leadership team doesn't reflect a diverse population, there's a good chance there's nobody at the top that is going to be having the voice and continuing to keep the focus on it. That's not true in every case, but that's an easy way to go and just look. Is it diverse already? And if not, am I the first one? Because that doesn't sound fun. I've done that enough times, John, where it's exhausting, man. It is exhausting trying to make sure. I remember I was telling this story to a team of folks I was in training with the other day. And it was like, I was always the youngest executive, and I was always the only minority at the table. And I always felt like I was representing young people. I was representing Black people. I was representing all of the, and I couldn't let that. And oh, by the way, I'm also trying to make sure that I keep my job so I can make sure that my family is taken care of. So the weight on my shoulders to not let any of them down was exhausting.
Well, and also the feeling that you need to overperform in order to be status.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so it was almost like I had to become so valuable that there's no way you could fire me without getting in trouble. I mean, I'm going to bring so much value that you can't fire me, And while, that probably has its place, it's also something that's not healthy. And I love the work that I do. So guess what? That's like Miracle Grow on a workaholic that now can't shut it off. And that's a whole other struggle that I've had, because, having to prove yourself and then slowing down at the same time.
I think you were a benefit in that you weren't brought in as the EDI person. You were brought in for the function, and you happen to do that. I just have a lot of friends who are either in that role in organizations or consultants, and their big thing is, just because you bring in a diversity equity specialist, they don't do it.
Right.
They're not, now that you can't just delegate all that to them.
Right. You're not done now.
Right. It's that person can't do it for your leadership team. They're there to inform your leadership team of the behaviors that need to be adjusted and adopted. Right. And that's a big complaint I hear from my friends, is that they brought me in and now they're done.
Right.
They're not done.
I am I'm not looking forward to, but it's going to be interesting in a couple of years when we do the math, the evidence-based turnover numbers on the people that were hired into these roles and then left within a year. And what they found out was they were hired because now they are the face of diversity, but the organization wouldn't tolerate it. And so they left. They realized that all the things you said that you wanted to do, you never supported me in, you never supported the organization in. And so I'll bet you those numbers are going to blow our minds, in terms of how many organizations tried, but because they didn't realize the systemic and full-bodied, it's not just a person or a position or a title, it's bigger than that. I think the turnover numbers on that are going to blow our minds when we look at it.
Well, and I think you nailed it on the head, which is, if you look at, when I work with groups that are looking at their values or the behaviors, I actually first do behaviors. Tell me what it looks like to do those things, and then we can suss out the values. And there's certain things that you say, all right, let's look at our value statement. If it's in, 80% of the other organizations that are out there, those are, you don't want to claim those as values. You want to say, you know what, if you want to be in this industry, that's the price of playing ball.
That's the
threshold. You got to bring that to it. You're not going to get hired unless you have those things. And to have your organization not only identify your differential values, the ones that are going to identify the things that are pay to play, If you're
Right.
not, if you're in any kind of business or any kind of industry and you don't have integrity, that should not be on your value statement, because if you've got to call out integrity, it
Right.
means that you're not hiring people with it. You
Yeah.
know,
You
if
know,
you
so for our listeners, if you wanted to learn more about what John's talking about, go find Patrick Lencioni's book. That is where this is literally what he talks about. It's talking about organizational health. It's talking about aspirational values versus other values. And so it's a super important book. The book is called The Advantage by Patrick
yeah,
Lencioni, and he literally breaks down these different types of values. And you're right, you shouldn't have to
yeah,
call out things that should just be.
right.
You should have. If you don't have that, you don't. We have to call that out. We got a problem.
Yeah. So, well, I want to be mindful of your time, and this is such a fun conversation. I could probably go on for another couple hours, but nobody wants to listen that long. I could, but a couple things before we go on. I just quick lightning round questions, and I think you think about this stuff. So first, what is the last book or media that you gave away to somebody? Like if you have a book that you give to people, or what's the last
I
one you
got it
gave?
right here. I have a couple of organizations that are struggling with this. It's called Scaling Up. I probably can't see that
Okay.
because of my background, but it's
Yeah.
called Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. There are organizations who are growing really fast, and they haven't grown real fast in the past, and they're trying to figure that out.
Okay. Good. Tell me one or two of your heroes.
Heroes. Wow. I think I would call out my parents as heroes, in the roles that they've done and the things that they've done. I think that they are heroes. The woman that I described to you who was in EDI for 30 years. I mean, it's the unsung heroes are people who aren't calling attention to themselves. They're just going out and doing the things that they know are right because it's the right thing to do. Anyone in that category is my hero.
Okay. So who do you find yourself quoting most? Author, movie, leader? Who do you quote
Wow.
most?
In recent years, it's a lot of Brene Brown is rolling out of my mouth. And if you don't know who Brene Brown is, just go online and plug in anything. You'll find some really great things out there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're gonna wrap things up here, and I want to encourage everybody, if you get a chance to see some of the stuff. Darrell's one of the people who is like his heroes. He doesn't call attention to himself very much, but man, is he doing wonderful things. So if you get a chance, Darrell, how can people find you and get in contact with you?
That's very nice, John. The name of my company is Higher Ground Consulting. That's HIGHER. It's kind of funny, John. One of my corporate moves was to Tampa, Florida. And while I was down there, my boss, a big merger came along, and my boss came in and said, "Hey, Darrell, we want to keep you on as the SVP of this merged company." And I was like, "Yeah, Tampa's not really doing really well for my family. Great for me and my career, but not for my family. I think I'm going to move back to higher ground," thinking back to Colorado,
Right.
above sea level. And then I was kind of like, wait a minute, I'm 6'7".
That's pretty good.
I see from a different perspective. And so it's
Yeah.
highergroundconsulting.org.
Yeah.
And so
And not org.
org, right?
Can people find you on Facebook or LinkedIn? Or...
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not a big social media guy. I'd rather do the work instead of talk about the work. So yeah, so you'll find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the only social media you'll find me on.
Yeah. Well, and everybody out there, if you've listened to this conversation, you know what a quality person Darrell is. So I encourage you to reach out on any of these issues, because he's doing great stuff. He is truly being president kind as he does great things. So thank you for the time, and I look forward to hearing more from you, Darrell.
Yeah, same here, John. Thank you for leading out in this effort and leading out these conversations, man. I look up to you and I respect you greatly. So thank you for having me on.